Hey YouTube, welcome back. Today we're talking about Petrified Blood. I think this is one of the most interesting mechanics that's been introduced in Path of Exile, perhaps ever. And I've been spending the past week or so on Twitch while streaming, in Discord, and making characters in game, kind of brainstorming things. I've been spending time on PoE Ninja, trying to see how other people are building their characters, watching YouTube videos, all sorts of good stuff. Trying to brainstorm what is the use case for this? Should I be using it? And if I should be using it, what kind of character should be using this? So we're going to go over a couple things. First things first, we'll touch on the numbers, because I think this will be most interesting to you, especially if you spend a lot of time in PoB like I do. We'll talk about what kind of things benefit from having a big life pool, or what kind of things benefit from having a relatively small life pool by cutting it in half. We're going to talk about the things that I've tried, the things that I haven't tried, that are kind of on my to-do list, and then what kind of new archetypes are going to be brought to PoE because Petrified Blood is now in the game. So first things first with Petrified Blood, before we talk about the numbers here, let me show you exactly what it looks like. I have no auras on at all. If I turn on my Petrified Blood, you can see that only one thing happens. It reserves my mana, 35%, and then it puts some spiky looking claws on my health bar. You'll see that as I spend mana, it adds a life cost to those skills, and I'll have to spend a bunch of mana in order to get my life to go down low enough. Welcome back. Now that we've arrived here, you see that my life total is cut in half. I have 2,600 out of 5,200. My mana is still reserved, and as I spend mana on my skills to cast them, I no longer have an associated life cost. I cannot gain life that goes above the 50% mark. The only way that I can possibly raise my life above that mark is by using a flask like this. So I can still flask up if I want to, but if I use any skills above that point, these skills are going to have life cost, so eventually it's going to bring it down. Let me turn all the auras on my character back on, and then we're going to go back and talk about what exactly this does. So, numbers, are you excited? So the normal Petrified Blood, if you have no quality on it, no alternate quality, no special unique items or anything like that, this is what it does. It says you prevent 40% of damage that you take when you're below 50% health. So, say that you're 50% health here, I have 2,600 life, I'm always below 50% life because of the way that I set up this character. So when I take damage, 40% of the damage that I take below half health is prevented, and 76% of that damage, of that 40%, is taken as life loss. It's not damage over time, it's life loss. So I still need to leech through it or regen through it, something along those lines. So roughly speaking, you might hear people say, isn't Petrified Blood just 10% increased damage taken? It's like putting an abyssus on your head. And that means that you're cutting your life total in half, but you're only preventing 40% of the damage instead of 50% of the damage. And that is roughly what people mean when they say that you're taking 10% increased damage. Now, of that damage, you're still taking a lot of it. It's just taken as damage over time, as opposed to taken as upfront bursty damage. So as an example, if you're taking a hit of 5,000 damage, you're going to take 3,000 damage of it up front, and then you're going to take 1,500 damage over 4 seconds. So this is like your dedication to leech. This is your extra life regeneration, or you panic slapping your flask over the next 4 seconds to make sure that this life total doesn't kill you. Now, just one more thing. This has to do with alternate quality stuff, and you might have seen this if you watched Zizaran's video recently, talking about how Petrified Blood makes you tanky. I still think it's too risky. I think that he should not have been using it if he wants to be tanky in that way. But technically, I see where he's coming from, even though I think it's a bad choice. So Anomalous Petrified Blood with a level 4 enhance, these are the numbers that happen this time. Compare these numbers to the ones you see up above. We have 51% of damage prevented. So remember, we're cutting our life total in half. And if we're preventing damage below that, we're taking increased damage. And if we're preventing damage above 50%, that means that we are becoming more tanky. So we're preventing 51% of that damage, but we're taking 213% of that prevented damage as life loss over time. Compare that to the numbers up here, and you'll see why this is a huge increase in damage taken if you don't have dedication to life leech or regeneration or a flask that can compensate that. So generally speaking, you probably can get through this. So 51% of that damage is prevented, which means, strictly speaking, against one-shots, we are making ourselves tankier by that 1%. However, even though this means that we've mitigated the initial hit, we still have to deal with the 213% of the prevented damage taken as life loss over the next 4 seconds, as opposed to 76%. All right, an example. If we have Petrified Blood with the Anomalous and the level 4 enhance, when we get hit with 5,000 damage, as opposed to 5,000 damage up here, we are going to take a smaller upfront damage, so 3,000 with a normal quality and 2,450 with the alternate quality and level 4 enhance. But instead of taking 1,520 damage over 4 seconds, we'll be taking 5,431 damage over the next 4 seconds. Hopefully this helps you understand the trade-off between having a better mitigation against the upfront damage and the kind of damage that you'll be taking over time. So before we moved on, at the very beginning of the video, I wanted to make sure that we have a good understanding of what's going on with normal Petrified Blood and the Anomalous Petrified Blood. So the next things here, let's talk about mechanics that scale with you having a very big life pool, and we'll talk about the mechanics that scale well with you relatively having a very small life pool. Things that scale with you having a big life pool, Life Leech. Life Leech is more effective if you have an enormous life pool because it's a percentage of your maximum life. That's your maximum total recovery from Life Leech. In addition to that, there's things like recover % life on block. If you have 10,000 life and you're recovering 5% life on block, that's going to be a much larger value than if you only had 5,000 life. That'd be twice as much. Things like gain % life as extra maximum ES. If you have a Gravicious chess piece, or if you're using something like Corrupted Soul, like a Doriani Timeless Jewel, this would be a good way of getting a big value, even though you're cutting your life pool in half. Because this text does not care about what your actual life total is. It cares about your total 100% life total. The next thing here is stun mitigation. Remember, stun mitigation in PoE is a function of how big the initial hit is relative to your maximum red life pool. So we're cutting our life pool in half. The big one, the 100%, is still, it's normal calculation. And not only that, but if we scroll up, we remember that from our calculation of above, we are mitigating that initial hit and we're making it a bit smaller. So we do have some kind of stun mitigation, even though we're going like pseudo low life. Next up, mechanics that scale with a small life pool. So if you have things like life gain on hit, well, 20 life gain on hit's not that good, but what if you had 40 life gain on hit? So because our life pool is nice and small, life gain on hit is much larger. It's twice as large as it normally would be compared to our relative 50% life pool. So if we have a skill that hits a lot, maybe like Ball Lightning here in the background, this would be a good way of taking advantage of a bunch of small hits to keep ourselves nice and safe, especially when we need to mitigate the damage over time or the life loss that Petrified Blood puts on us over the next 4 seconds. So we've talked about a lot of numbers, but why would we even put Petrified Blood onto our build in the first case? Is it really just something that we add on because it makes us tanky, or because it makes us take more damage, or is there something else we get out of it? Good question. First things first, we get Overleech. Because we're never at max, we always have something that we are able to leech through. So as long as we don't reserve more than 50% of our life total, so when you leech with Petrified Blood in game, you'll see that the leech shows up above your normal red health pool, and even though your life won't go up, you will continue to have that leech stack over the next 4 seconds. So this is exactly the same as Slayer Overleech. So other than Overleech, what else do we have access to? Well, first of all, for spells, we have access to Pain Attunement with 30% more spell damage. There's, I think, 1 unique item, maybe 2 unique items in the game that have Pain Attunement written on them, but otherwise you'd have to path all the way over to it to get this notable. If you're pathing next to this normally, it's pretty free. It just costs you 1 skill point. But if you're playing a build that looks maybe a little bit like mine, then you'll see that maybe you have to spend 1, 2, 3, 4 points to get over to this. But at least for my character, this is very worthwhile. For attack-based characters, this gives you access to something called Bloodthirst Support. Bloodthirst Support gives you flat physical damage added to your attacks equal to a function of your life pool while you're on low life. So you only get access to this if you're on low life. So you stack up a bunch of life, maybe a bunch of strength, and you see something like a Pillar of the Cage God character if you want to go investigate that on PoE Ninja, or I'm sure there's plenty of guides on YouTube already for that. For Champion, you get access to something that people might call Permanent Adrenaline, where even though you're at 50% life total, you can flask up above that total, use any skill, which because of Petrified Blood has an added life cost to it, and as soon as you hit the 50% mark, you will once again activate your 10 or 20 seconds of Adrenaline, whatever the ascendancy says, I forget. I don't think there's a great benefit of using Petrified Blood, as you could always get permanent Adrenaline on a champion by just weapon swapping to 2 Midnight Bargain in your offhand, or having some kind of Blood Magic setup or Corrupting Fever setup. So in addition to the keystones and the support gems that you get for being low life and using Petrified Blood, there's a couple other things that you get access to as well. First up is Lori's Lantern. Probably not worth a ring socket as a full endgame character, but it's a very unique form of defense. It says damage with hits against you while you're on low life is unlucky, which means that it's rolled twice, just like Dungeons and Dragons, if you're familiar with that, and it takes the lower of those 2 values. It's the opposite of having Diamond Flash turned on, and especially against spiky damage, something like lightning damage or even the die beam during the Cyrus fight, this could be a great form of defense. Next up is Red Beak. We can dual wield these 2 swords while leveling, or we can just use one with a shield if we're playing a spellcaster. Red Beak has a global 100% increased damage on it, and it even applies to things like Righteous Fire, which makes it a nice way of scaling damage when we're nice and early on in the game. If we upgrade the Red Beak to a Dread Beak via the Fated Prophecy, this gives us permanent onslaught while we're on low life. It preserves the 100% increased global damage while we're on low life in Petrified Blood, and it also happens to have some good physical damage on it in case you wanted to use this for an attack-based character. Next up is Dresso's Courage, which gets 3 stars next to it, because I think it's a fantastic reason for going low life. Dresso's Courage has 30 block and 30 spell block on it, and then if you've blocked attack damage recently, you get 20 spell block, and if you've blocked spell damage recently, you get 20 more attack block. During some kind of hectic scenario, like an ultimatum, for example, this shield by itself gives you 50 block and 50 spell block. So you could very realistically use a Dresso's Courage on a low life character and get max block without glancing blows. Sure, you might not get access to recover life on block mechanics because you're not using a rare Shaper Shield, but just being max block, using something like Dresso's Courage and not going out of your way too much to get block nodes, this is a really, really good payoff for going low life. The last unique item that I want to call it here is Prism Guardian. Prism Guardian allows you to reserve things on your life without linking them to Blood Magic support. Or Blood Magic got renamed. Without linking them to Arrogance support. This means that you don't need to pay the 200% increased mana multiplier for reserving those things on your life, which means that you can very realistically use Prism Guardian to reserve something like Petrified Blood and a Herald on your life without reserving more than 50% of your life total. So 1 week ago when I started investigating Petrified Blood, I didn't have a good idea of how to build it or what I wanted to do with it, but I just wanted to explore. I wanted to try things. I wanted to go on PoE Ninja and see what other people were doing, watch YouTube videos, see what those people were doing, and I wanted to do something with Petrified Blood that would help me form my own opinion on whether it's good or bad or otherwise. So here's what I've tried so far. I've tried a normal life-based build. I've tried life plus Corrupted Soul, having a small life pool but a big ES pool. I've tried a life plus Ichimonji approach, trying to use the fact that Petrified Blood counts as a buff, and one of the only ways to scale buff effects in Path of Exile is with Ichimonji. At this point, I started taking my builds in a different direction, thinking that Petrified Blood is going to make me take additional damage because I'm not using Anomalous Petrified Blood, and I want something that's going to have some kind of defensive setup, or maybe mitigating the damage that I take instead of just to my life or just to my energy shield, but maybe I can take it to my Mind Over Matter instead. So I've tried a life plus Mind Over Matter plus Archmage build. I did a Essence Worm setup with Petrified Blood in the Essence Worm, and then I had Clarity and Vitality reserved on my life total. The Essence Worm, you'd have to compare this to Wrath and see whether that's worthwhile, and I ended up ditching this altogether. Next up, I tried a life Mind Over Matter Archmage. Oh wait, no, I said this already. Next up, I tried a life Mind Over Matter Corrupted Soul character. This was an Archmage Cremation Necromancer. I had about 3,000 energy shield, maybe 2,000 unreserved life, and then maybe 4,000 or 5,000 mana. I ended up ditching this too because I didn't think this was any better than a normal Archmage Cremation Necromancer, and I couldn't see any particular benefit that Petrified Blood was bringing to us. And the last build that I'm trying right now is actually the character that I have up in the background, this Ball Lightning Raider. And this is a life plus Mind Over Matter non-Archmage character. My idea was to reserve Petrified Blood as 35% mana reservation on my mana instead of trying to put it in an Essence Worm. In addition to that, because Essence Worm puts a penalty on how much mana reservation your other auras have, it allows me to reserve extra things here. You'll see that I have Dread Banner and Vitality and Clarity reserved in my life, and then I'm not an Archmage character, so I don't necessarily care so much about having my mana reserved here. My Arcane Cloak is only maybe 1,500 defense right now, which means strictly speaking, it's giving me less defense than something like a level 20 Steel Skin would. So I need to get more mana on this character so that Arcane Cloak has more defensive benefits than Steel Skin, but it does have offensive benefits of scaling how much damage I'm dealing when it's up. So I've tried a lot of stuff and I've had a lot of conversations talk about Petrified Blood, but there are 3 other builds, at least off the top of my mind right now, that I've not tried yet and I kind of want to try. The first would be a Scion or a Pathfinder Scion with no life reserved. So I'd reserve 35% of my mana for Petrified Blood and then have no life reserved at all. And then I would have high uptime of my life flask. A Scion and Pathfinder would have like my life flask gain charges over time because of the ascendancy. I could even take the one new node on the tree that says your life flask gain charges over time. This would be a way of getting kind of 40% more life in my character if you think about it that way. The second thing that I want to try is something that I found on PoE Ninja. It seems like it's a fairly common thing to do. So this would be a summoner with no life reserved. The additional benefit of this is that you won't be spamming skills too often, so you won't incur the additional life cost that Petrified Blood puts in your skills when you're above 50% life. This would just be a way of making your character tankier, and this would be maybe something that you use instead of Flesh and Stone. The last character that I want to try out that I haven't quite tried out yet would be something with Diadem. I don't really like Mind Over Matter plus Eldritch Battery builds as a matter of principle, because when I think about it, if Energy Shield is on the left side of my screen protecting my life, it's protecting all of my life with all of its value. But if I take my energy shield and put it on the right side of my screen instead and lock it behind Mind Over Matter, then the efficacy that my energy shield has, instead of being 100% effective of protecting my health, it's now 30%. It's locked behind the Mind Over Matter effect. That said, I do want to try this at some point. It could be interesting. So while I kept exploring Petrified Blood, I thought to myself, what's new in PoE? What does Petrified Blood allow me to do differently in 3.14 that's never been a thing in the past? And currently, my answer to that question is this. There's a new archetype that you couldn't really build in the past that now you can build, and that's a Mind Over Matter low life character. The closest thing that we've had in the past that's an analogy to this would be a low life Ivory Tower Mind Over Matter build, but in that case, the mana only protects against chaos damage. It's not really doing its full effect of keeping you alive against generic damage, so it's kind of a different build altogether. Now, there are some issues with this kind of build, so we're still kind of working through this, but this is what I've come to so far. Issue number 1 would be, where do you reserve the 35% mana? Maybe you have a Shaper Shield with reduced mana reservation of skills, maybe using Prism Guardian and using something that we talked about before to put a Prism Guardian and maybe some kind of Herald on your life to reserve less than 50% of your life. Issue number 2 is, what does that 35% mana reservation compete with? What could you be using instead? You could be using Wrath if you have an Essence Worm, or you could be using some Herald, or even something else beyond that. If we choose to reserve our mana instead of reserving our life with something like Prism Guardian, well, then we run into some other issues. All of a sudden, our build is not quite so great for Archmage because we no longer have a large unreserved mana pool. It's not so great for Indigon either because Indigon wants basically the same thing. Hands of the Fervent kind of falls in the same category. It's interesting, but it doesn't quite work with our build. We could probably brute force it with a bunch of money in a softcore trade league, but as a build that's new and unique, or even a new archetype altogether, I don't think this is quite where I want it to be. So that brings me to my current build, and this is the thing that I'm trying right now in the background. This is a Ball Lightning Raider, and we're not Archmage. We're just kind of a value Mind Over Matter character. We're using Clarity, Vitality, and Dread Banner reserved on our life, and then we only have Petrified Blood reserved on our mana. Like I said before, we still have some bit of offense coming in from the fact that we're stacking up mana in our build. We have Arcane Cloak, which adds about 18% of my total damage with level 20 gems with my current gear. And in addition to that, we get to use Crown of the Inward Eye, which gives us Transfiguration of Mind, Body, and Soul, which kind of rewards us in another way for stacking up mana in our build. This build is definitely a work in progress right now, but it has a couple of really interesting things going on with it. I'll probably make a YouTube video about this in the future as well. I can tell you right now that in SSF, being able to craft some rings that have a bunch of life gained on hit by spells has felt really, really good with my self-cast Ball Lightning. It keeps me super healthy in a scenario like an Ultimatum, and it also has good synergy with our relatively low health pool from Petrified Blood. So, do I recommend Petrified Blood? It's kind of like an Abyssus. Depends. How excited are you for putting an Abyssus in your build? For attack-based builds, we already have access to lots of good support gems, so we don't need to go out of our way to change our build dramatically, incorporating Petrified Blood, just to have access to Bloodthirst support gem. For spells, if you're already Path near Pain Attunement, or at least within 4 points or so of it, it's pretty good. It's 30% more damage for 35% mana reservation. I wouldn't toss this into any old build. If I were going to include Petrified Blood on a build and try to make it low life as a spellcaster, I would definitely want to build it from the ground up in that way, instead of trying to smack it into my build later on as an additional afterthought. So in general, would I recommend Petrified Blood to your build? No. Not really. Not until something changes in Path of Exile. Any small change with Petrified Blood could be drastic. Something like reducing the mana reservation from 35% to 25%. Something like changing the life cost that it has on skills, or maybe in the numbers that appear on the gem, or even how buff effect scales it. My big takeaway is this. For all the different ways that exist in Path of Exile to scale my damage, I don't want to pick the one that cuts my life total in half. I'd rather just pick something else that doesn't interfere with my defenses. So, what do you think? What do you think about Petrified Blood? Have you been using it in any of your own builds? Have you done any of the combinations of defenses or offense that I've talked about here? Are you scaling your damage or even your defense in different ways? As always, I try to respond to all the comments here on YouTube, but if you want to chat live, you can come to twitch.tv/parrythepig, where I stream most days, almost every day. But that's it for me. We'll see you next time.